Hey friends and music makers, Ableton 12.2, it's coming June 11th. But here's the real question, is this actually game changing for your own music, or is it just another shiny distraction? Here's the thing, I've been beta testing 12.2, and for me, this isn't just bells and whistles. We're talking some serious professional tools that also make life easier for beginners. So for the next couple of hours, I'm making music with these brand new features, exploring the devices, workflows, and hidden gems you need to know about. I'll show you exactly how to integrate these tools into your workflow. No fluff, just practical techniques you can use the moment you download the update. By the end, you'll know if 12.2 is worth your time and exactly how it can level up your music production. Are you ready? Let's dive in and make some music. So, as always, we do a little bit of a test of our levels here, make sure everything's working fine. Let's hit play on this little project here just to check that. And it's also probably a little bit of a view of some of the sounds we might be making today. So, everything looking good and sounding good this end. If you're in the stream and you fancy doing me a favor and letting me know, is the microphone sounding fine? Is the levels working good? And did you hear the music fine? That would be much appreciated. So we're going to start a brand new project. We're going to begin with an empty canvas. And as I said, today we're looking at what's coming in 12.2, and it's publicly download for everybody. Out on June the 11th. Many people were asking, when was it coming out? Well, Ableton finally let the news out, let the cat out the bag, as we say. So let's make a bit of music with the devices and features and walk through what they mean to our music production. So I'm just going to have some drums here, just a loop for now. Focus probably today isn't so much on drums. We might make our own a little bit later, but that's just a groove to get ourselves going a little bit here. Let's have a tempo change as well. Let's have 128. Something like that. Let's hit play on this just so we know what we've got there. Nice and easy, just a kick and a nice kind of groovy kind of hi-hat there. As always as well, by the way, feel free to drop any questions you've got in the chat as we go. It's an interactive kind of thing here. I'm making music. You're letting me know if you've got any questions. You're also feel free to interact with each other and also say hello. Let us know where you're tuned in and listening from. So we've got a drum beat. Let's look at straight away a few devices here. Actually, I've made a bit of a mistake here. I do want a new project, but what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to open up one that just gives me a guide to what I wanted to speak about 12.2. So let's say we don't save that. Quick change. It's literally just this, so this will just keep me on the rails so I don't drift off and go somewhere else. Nothing again here music wise, just basically the devices that I think we should focus on and the features, as I said, that are coming in 12.2. So we've got our drum beat again over here on this track. That's just, I like to make music while I'm sort of going through these features. Kind of gives me, also keeps me on track. So again, 128 I think is a nice tempo to work with. We're going to be sort of making something like a bit of dub techno, a bit of kind of underground tech house techno. All right, so let's start with a couple of the music making devices. So maybe we're sat here and we're thinking, okay, we've got 12.2 open and we want to apply some of the new features or devices, and those are ones that can give us chords or music. So let's start with meld. What's happened in meld in 12.2? Well, there's a new oscillator. So let's bring an instance of meld into Ableton, bring it over to here, and let's take a look at it and simply, let's also arm it. So there we are, we've got a bit of meld. If we look down in meld, the synth itself, we've got a brand new oscillator coming in 12.2. And if we skip from the default A, which is the basic shapes here, we just go one left, we go straight to it. and it's a chord oscillator. So a lot of the features in 12.2 that are coming, they're pretty good for music. So if we now play a key on our keyboard, we get, and we'll turn off oscillator B for the moment. I'm just playing single notes. So if you look at my piano roll here, so nice, we've got like an instant kind of chord that's going on. And a lot of the changes in 12.2, such as this oscillator and expressive chords, that we're going to look at in a moment, they're a lot about sort of what things sound like. So they're not as sort of, which is quite good actually in a way, particularly if you're new to a lot of this and music and you don't have a background, let's say, in music, but you want to train your ear, or you know when something sounds good. A lot of these devices like this. So again, this is not really telling us much more other than we're getting a chord when we're playing any keys on our keyboard, black or white, doesn't matter, up or down. Of course we get higher pitches and lower pitches, but we're getting a chord. It's quite nice. So let's have a little bit of a noodle around with that, hit play on our drums, and let's see if we can get a little bit of a riff going here with the meld, just to get ourselves started, and then we can dive into this oscillator a bit more. But let's just see if we can lay down a bit of a pattern. Okay, so something like that could work, just a very simple riff. So let's capture that, and we'll pick, let's say, a favorite sort of section of that, or one that's kind of loops around pretty good. Let's just test a couple of these out. I played the same sort of riff over and over a little bit, so maybe even this one only over here. Gonna need a little bit of quantization. I think I can work with this one over here. So let's actually just do a little bit of a copy that down so that we've got an original version of it parked below, and then we're just going to crop this particular clip here. So we're going to work on this one for a moment, and let's just quantize whatever we need to quantize in here. Let's try maybe this note. So that'll do. Leave it with a little bit of humanization. So we've got a nice simple pattern, and so this chord oscillator here is, as I said, giving us that kind of chord feeling straight off the bat. So I've just played single notes, as you can see on my keyboard over here, and I've got a chord shape happening. So then what can we do with that chord shape? Well, I'll show you a couple of kind of cool ideas here. So let's maybe put the meld into a rack. So let's Command G to group it, and we'll duplicate it down. So we've got a couple of instances of it, and we'll turn one off for now, but one of them we're going to start playing around with, and then we can do a bit of a shootout in a moment, because this particular meld, well, both of them so far, all we've done is change the chord oscillator. We haven't touched the two macros which are important to how this will sound. So if we now hit play on our pattern and we play with the shape, nice, I like that straight away right there. And the thing is that you can be looking in this whole shape macro for things that are really tuned to a certain sort of sound. They could be a little bit off tuning, so they could be a tonal. I'm not paying attention here to any sort of music theory. The only thing I paid attention to was the notes I played, the rhythm of those notes. I quantized them a bit, but other than that, what I'm doing here now is by ear, right? I'm just tuning that around So this is why it can be good to copy a few down, because maybe you want to try out a few different positions. Or what you can do, which is kind of cool, is use the snapshots as well. So we can look at that in a moment. I can remember 16.7. Let's move it around a bit. So some less musical like that. That's more atonal, more kind of edgy. So let's go back in here somewhere. And now if we use the inversion, you'll hear what happens there. So it's taking that chord shape and transposing it up. And if you look over here, of course, we can re-pitch these notes as well, or re-pitch the oscillator. Right, so if you want a deeper chords, the other thing you could do with that, of course, is go up to your notes and move those down. Okay, so let's say maybe we set our notes here, have a nice deep kind of chords. So I really love this chord oscillator, everything you kind of see so far. What else could we do? Well, we didn't really start with a musical scale, right? I just played again, some white keys on the keyboard, pattern, riff, rhythm. That was the focus. The oscillator's giving us chords. We can invert them, change the shape, pitch it up and down. But what about if we turn on scale awareness? So this is also really, really cool about this, because what you can do, put in your pattern, get this kind of shape happening nice and fast. And now what you can do is actually play around with different keys and scales and transpose, let's say, the chord oscillator and the meld to follow that. So watch what happens here. So if I turn this on to be now scale aware, it's going to be paying attention to whatever the global key and scale is. And then let's try moving, let's say we do minor. And you will hear a tone change. Let's just put a limiter on the master so we can give it a little bit more juice before we get more elements in the track. Just so you can hear the subtleties of C as the scale major minor. A little bit brighter, let's go something quite wild. So again, what's really cool about this, put your pattern in, get your rhythm, get your notes, play around the chord oscillator, and then you can like basically turn on scale awareness and put that chord oscillator into that key and scale. Very, very cool feature. So you can, again, start without a music plan, come up with your notes and rhythm, put this synth, choose this oscillator, and mess around with this. So this is definitely a favorite oscillator feature of 12.2 for me. I love that they've got this chord oscillator meld. I think it sounds really good. So let's choose in the end up here a bit of a, I'm not going to have C Locrian, but you can sort of hear the differences of playing around with that. I want minor, but now I'm just going to try different keys. That's nice, kind of like B minor. And I've shown before, if you choose B minor up here, scale awareness, this means that this chord oscillator, as I said, is now working. Whatever we do in the shape and inversions, they are going to be in key and scale with what we've got up here. If we go in here and you get confused at all, you look at your MIDI notes and you think, oh, okay, they're not really in scale. Well, they're not. I didn't play them to that scale. If you want to put them in scale, you can do that also nicely with Ableton. You can come over here and you could select all these notes here. Even though we don't have to do this, if we leave everything switched on like we've got, those notes are in B minor because we have the scale awareness on the meld. But you could also put this, select all your notes and choose fit to scale here, and Ableton will nudge those notes into that scale. But, you know, maybe I'm just going to do that. Yeah, it sounds pretty much the same because that's what it's doing. So now we've kind of matched both of those things together. So that's pretty cool. What can we do next? We did deliberately put the meld down and do a second one. So what I want to show you is, let's actually just remove that for a second. We'll do it in a moment. We'll, let's ungroup this. Okay, so it's just working with this meld for the moment. But what I want to do is I'm going to show you a nice little trick as well for further developing it. We're doing a bit of sound design here as well. We're kind of exploring 12.2, new meld chord oscillator, but we're also looking at sort of how you can kind of, how you use it and how you can kind of think even a bit further outside the box. So let's group it. Let's open up the macros. What I'm going to do is I'm going to map the shape to macro 1, and I'm going to map the inversion to macro 2. Right, and then what I'm going to do straight away, and this is pretty important because I already like what's going on with those two macros, is I'm going to open up as well the snapshot area over here, and I'm going to select new. That means that I've basically safeguarded this selection here. I can always go back and reset to that by clicking the play here on the snapshot. Very wise move. Love that feature as well of the snapshots inside of racks, because it reminds me of Electron machines where you can take them far from where you began, but you can always bring it back to where you started. So now I'll show you what's pretty cool about that, mapping those two macros here to the rack and then setting it as a snapshot. Now what we can do is hit play here, and now we can start randomizing these in case we come up with something else. And if we like anything, we just click new, and that's a new snapshot. Lots. So I'm going to save another one there, but now I can go always back to the very first one, which is the one I'm going to stick with. But as you can see, this is a great way to run a bit of a shootout and let the randomization feature of the racks randomize the chord shapes and inversion for you and come up with some very cool little options here. And you could just keep doing that, and as I said, you could map other things into that. So very easily, like we could do a whole video just on how we could expand that, because we could map other things on the synth like the filter cutoff and the sustain and decay, and they could be included in these mapping randomizations, and we get some cool things. But this is just a really nice way straight up to get to understand a bit what's happening with these two macros connected to the meld chord oscillator, and how you can set up a fun little workflow here to kind of play around with that and come up with some different variations, and maybe one that you prefer. We could also automate these in the track or record them to audio and move between one to the other. So maybe the track starts playing with the original pattern, and then we change in a section of our song. So that could be automated, or we could record it to audio, all sorts of good stuff like that. Let's play around a bit with our envelopes. So we might have it sort of more plucky. So I hope you agree. I think the meld chord oscillator sounds great, works really good. So let's look at a couple of other things we can do, because once we do map the shape and inversion over to here, then we are sort of essentially, you know, taking over those, whereas we might want to, you know, leave those open and handle this a bit differently. Also, just to say here with this one, let's stack it with another oscillator. Let's choose maybe one of the FM ones. a bit of modulation on this filter cutoff. Let's use an envelope. So really, you know, you can layer it up with whatever you want. I even played around a little bit with it the other day as well. Why not? We could also have another chord oscillator. So again, this is thinking outside the box a bit. You could actually go back in here. I mean, I like what we've got going on there with the simple FM. So maybe what we'll do again is we'll just pop out of the snapshots and we'll just go to our group here and we'll put another chain together just so we don't lose that particular meld that we've got there. Turn it off, and that way we can come back to this one. We can make a change here, because yeah, I thought like to myself, well, what would happen if I actually just, I think it's actually quicker to go this way. If I make another chords oscillator here, so the same oscillator, but we repitch it a bit. So right here I've got 7 scale degrees. I could do the 5th, so I could repitch that. And now I've got a whole other chord oscillator on top of the other one. So tip of the iceberg, but for this kind of music that I'm thinking to make today, super nice. So here's my first layer where I've layered the FM with the chord. I really like this. And I can go back to my snapshots and I can flick through the variations that I made earlier, randomizing these 2 macros, right? Nice. So that's a little look at this. One other tip would be as well, let's do one more meld here just so you can see another last little workflow for what I was going to sort of say. If we've got the chord oscillator in play over here and we want the shape and inversion, but we want to do something a little bit different to what we've done here. So we've been using the snapshots. That was the clever thing that we've done there. So we can flick through some variations. But if we just look at meld before we map these, because once we map these to macros, like I said, we kind of lose a little bit of what we could do in the background. So with this new meld here, let's just have a look at that for a second. Okay, so we've got a shape and inversion like that, but this time what we're going to do is open up the mod matrix here, and on these we could add modulation to those. So instead of mapping them to macros and randomizing the macros, we could go here and go and use our modulation sources. So this is macro 1, oscillator macro 1. We could use an envelope. And that is now starting to modulate this. So maybe not an envelope, maybe go LFO2. So it's going to need a little work to make it right. What about if we do macro 2? All right, so let's make one so that it actually makes sense. So let's say macro 1, and we're going to go into LFO1. So let's get over to that page here and have a look. And LFO1, let's bring it up to about, say, 50 or 30 for the moment. So this sine wave is modulating the shape macro. Now let's make it, slow it down. So you get this really nice kind of musical kind of movement. What about if we start changing that shape? Not the alternate, we want something like wander. All All right, let's try another idea here. So let's say we go back to the basic shapes, slay rate there. Well, I like that. And then we go over to the LFO FX1. We play around in here a bit. So you'd be working a little bit in here to get, obviously spending some time on the sound design here, but you could have these macros both be modulated as a different way to kind of make a very interesting chord shapes and inversions, differences to these two macros using all the beautiful meld modulation tools that we have here with the LFO1 and the LFO FX. And while we're in here, one thing that is also new in the meld, so we've got this brand new chord oscillator coming in 12.2 update. We've also got in the LFO1FX, there's already lots and lots of amazing shapes. There's this one called, where is it hiding? Scrambler down the bottom here. And this is a kind of new one, which, yeah, would have another effect on, actually, I didn't quite select it there. There it is there. So it's got this kind of like really pretty wild kind of shape to it. So let's move to our modulation across. And let's do a bit of two times modulation. Nice. So this new Scrambler is also really interesting. So two new points to focus in on meld in 12.2, free update to all users of Live 12, chord oscillator, and the Scrambler inside of the LFO1FX. And as I said, we can do a whole video one day just on getting the source out of meld and things like we're doing, which is modulating these two macros that come with every oscillator, right? Each oscillator type here has its own pairing, and then you can modulate that with envelopes and LFOs, and you can get kind of melodies going in there, which is what I was starting to kind of work on a bit there. I like what we've got here, but you could we'd be really wanting to sort of get like sample and hold, so we might sort of change a bit. All right. So lots of fun to be had in there. So I just wanted to show you another meld and possibilities just to think about before you go ahead. And if you were to take that particular meld and then map those macros, you would then, not really be able to sort of change these and have the sort of effect that you might want. So once they're mapped, as you can see over here now to macros, if we push play, we're not kind of like, it's a chain of events that's sort of going on. So you might want to think about, what you're doing here before mapping over here perhaps. So I'm going to go backwards a little bit to get rid of that mappings there. And we're going to go right back to the very first meld we did, where we did map those two over here. So we could randomize them, and we made some snapshots, and we've got our original, and we've got a few variations because I really like the result of what we've got there, which is this. So let's use that. as our main meld for now. And we might come back and tweak it a little bit, envelope wise. Depending on what else we get into our track. Nice. So that was a good look at meld, what's coming in 12.2. Let's add a little processing behind this so we can get a little bit of vibe. So we'll just have a hybrid reverb in there as well. Can be where it is. And we're just going to dub things out a little bit, I think, today. We can do all sorts of nice fun stuff over there. And let's just have now it nice and clean with a bit of reverb just to give it a bit of vibe. And let's work on the next thing. So the next thing we're going to do is pop in a new MIDI track, and we're going to do a bit of housekeeping. I'm going to label that as our meld kind of dub chords, right? And again, if you're just joining in the stream now and you weren't right from the beginning, that's the pattern I played on my keyboard and captured that is playing that chord oscillator in meld, which we layered with another oscillator B, which is an FM. So if we turn off that layer, sounds like that. So think about that. It's an oscillator that gives you chords. You can play one finger, patterns and rhythms, and get a nice chord out of it. And that seems to be a bit of a feature in this Ableton Live update. So the next thing that's coming in 12.2 is Expressive Chords. And I did a whole separate video on my channel on this. So if you want to see a deep dive on it, there is a separate video, which I can put a link to a card here. And that is where I've gone into this Expressive Chords device and unpacked what it does and what it's all about. Let's just say that much like the meld oscillator, it's very, very fun, intuitive, and it's just about sort of playing and a bit of ear training and learning what sounds good rather than getting sort of bogged down in lots of thinking and overthinking about music theory. You can just sort of load it up and get started and get playing. So let's say with our Expressive Chords, we give it a drift synth. Let's change our synth, maybe drift to a wavetable. So pop a drift on here. Expressive Chords, it's a MIDI effect, so it goes in front of your synth, and it basically is again going to turn one finger playing into chords, right? So if I hit here, right? So we get these really nice, rich kind of chord sounds, and when you just drop it in, that's the Expressive Chord device, it has a default set of chords, a bank of chords that it's going to play as you move around, and you can change views. You can learn a lot again from this device, because if you move the views to this view and you're playing a note, you can actually see what kind of chord it's generating here. In this case, a G sharp major, so it's a major. If we go somewhere else, okay, this is a B major 7, right? Add 9. So it's, you can actually, you might play something and you really like that chord quality, and you think, okay, I need to learn about what a major 7th and an 11 is, and you could go ahead and understand. And you can see all the notes it's playing to make that chord. It's 5 notes in this case. But once again, just to show you, if I put the piano roll in, I'm just playing a single note. We don't need to be playing chords here. Same with the meld oscillator. There's no chord playing. And white and black keys, all the good stuff. So what about just touching on something? I mentioned about banks of chords, right? So this is the default Expressive Chords I dragged in and dropped there. So it's got a bank of chords in there. If you open it up, you'll see there's a bunch of presets, let's say, that are loaded with a different set of chords, a different bank of chords. But I want to show you essentially how you can kind of load your own chords into it. So in the future, I'm sure there'll be many packs of expressive chords. I'd like to make some myself, and you could just basically import that pack of chords and again play around on your keyboard and you generate all those different chords. So just to show you how that works, if we go packs and we go down into expressive chords inside of the packs and we open it up a bit and you see MIDI files, these are the chord banks, the packs of chords. So if I grab the classic pop one and I bring it over and I drop it on this drift track where the expressive chords is and the drift is, I now open up expressive chords over here and I click import, and that's going to change the chord pack in there, that bank of chords, right? And each time you do that, you import those in, okay? And that's changing the chord bank in there. So that's really nice. And these all sound different. Like, so now if I have the classic pop, I'm getting different chords on the keyboard. And if I was to do the Detroit strings, I'd get another set of chords. Okay, so I'm actually going to go, let's see, I might go back to the default actually, just the expressive chord device that comes out with it, and I'll have a little listen rather than one of those banks, and then I'll just decide, am I going to change it to another chord bank? But they're nice and easy to do that, and as I said, in the future we'll be able to add our own. By the way, notice the comment area is a bit quiet, but do feel free to drop any comments or questions in there. Say hello if you're with me in the stream. Just gonna have a sip of water. It's a bit warm here today in Ibiza. I hope you're all doing well. All right, so we've got our beat and our meld. Let's get on this drift and see. Yeah, so I don't feel like I'm getting the chord a combination that I might like. So I'm actually going to try importing some different ones in here and see if I can find one that kind of gives me the sort of chords that might fit with what I've already got with the meld. So I'm going to follow that workflow, import those chord sets in, and see if I've got one that is going to complement more what I'm going to add to my meld. Also, you can kind of hear some are better fit than others. So that pop piano, probably not going with that. Neo Sol minor might be a good idea. I'm in B minor, so let's try that one. Fura 33, Fura 33, quite interesting. Never used Ableton, only FL Studio so far. Okay, well, welcome here to a demonstration of 12.2, the new update that's coming on June 11th that we've been excited about, and what is new about it and how we can use these devices. So yep, not with that one either. So might be, let's try Detroit House. So I'm bringing in the different chord banks, importing them in. That definitely sounds more moody. So somewhere in there, one of those works. So we're just going to capture. But it wasn't the more recent ones. It was a little while back that I kind of felt there was a better take of that little idea I was trying out there. I'm just noodling around on the keyboard, right? Yeah, it's about there somewhere. So what you can also do is once you've played in a pattern, or if you were programming the pattern, so we could quantize these notes maybe just a little bit as they were played. They don't need a lot. This one maybe. Actually, maybe this one a little, just a tiny bit. No, I'm going to undo that. So what you can do is once you've got your pattern like this, or you make up a pattern, you can then obviously flip the chord sets and we can move the notes around. So I'll show you what I mean by that. So I'm just going to crop this. I'm going to choose that as the main clip. Let's maybe duplicate it. So we've got a couple of options here. And then let's just do a bit of housekeeping here so we know what's what. We don't get lost here with bits and pieces. So yeah, that was a little, again, what are we doing? As you can see, I'm not playing chords. I just played a little riff on my keyboard, single notes. And with the connection to the Detroit House chord set, it's giving me those different chords on those notes. So if we close things up a bit, change our panel over, we'll kind of be able to see what it triggers when it's triggering the different chords, right? So if we sort of go in here and we loop that, it's not going to sound great, but I'm just going to show you, we can see what this chord is, right? So it just says custom chord, and it gives a bunch of notes down the bottom there for that one. What have we got next door? Okay, so that's A major 9 sus4. That's a pretty complex chord. And what have we got finally over here? Another custom chord. So the thing you can do is, if we sort of go back now and loop everything up, I just want to show you that I've just been playing one finger, right, and making that rhythm and pattern on my keyboard. And when I played the F sharp 2 and the C sharp 2, those were the chord shapes that I got. And actually I just saw, that was a bit silly of me, I didn't do a great job there. They were both going to play the same chord, right, because they're on the same note. So what am I talking about? Well, if we look here and we loop this up with our chord set, again a little bit tighter, we could change this to another chord. Like that. Nice. So there you go, right? So you can move the notes around and choose different chords from your pattern. So I'm not destroying the pattern, I'm just kind of exploring and choosing in the chord set. And if we didn't like that, we could flip this to another preset or a different chord pattern and see what happens if we do that, right? So if I duplicate the track over, hopefully it's staying with me here. And we go to this one, and let's say in that case we import the let's do the neo soul minor. So we're going to drag it onto the same track as the drift and the expressive chords. We're going to open up the expressive chords, import the neo soul minor, and now if I play my riff, so you can hear completely different chord set, right? And if I didn't like that, I can carry on, you know, trying out some of these different ones again until maybe so that could be usable as well. But I think we've got the one we need, which is the Detroit House chord set, and that little riff I played, and this little modification here I think works well. Maybe I'll loop the whole thing up now, and we'll have my original playing over here and those double up as part of the second bar, the second 2 bars, and in the first 2 bars we have this new little mod. I'll put this down though, because I do quite like that note. So we might just have the duplicates. Yeah, I'm going to stick with that for now. So I like that chord set, I like that pattern. Small change, we're going to get rid of that drift that I just added just for showing you possibilities here. So this one we're going to mark as our expressive chord device. As I said, if you want a bit more of a deep diver on that, there's a video on my YouTube channel where I've just exclusively broken down what you can do with this device. Again, it's super fun. It's just there that you can load it up and play around on your keyboard. Lots of fun, and come up with chords, right? If you're 33, you're very welcome. And as I said, feel free, anybody, if you've got any questions and you want to drop them in the chat, feel free to do that. So now we've got a little thing rolling. So we're just going to play with our drift just slightly, just to get it how we want it to sound. Let's keep that up. Somewhere in there, similar envelope to what we had on the meld. Let's give it a bit of reverb. So let's do now a little bit at looking at away from the music devices that we have new in 12.2, which is, you know, things that help us make chords, actually make music, the meld chord oscillator and the expressive chord device. We've put both of those into action. What have we got else that's coming? Well, we've got this auto filter update, the refacing of Ableton's auto filter. And let's just use that instead of me sort of diving into the filter on the drift here and playing around and shaping it there. Let's put an auto filter behind it. So we're going to go and grab one of those. We're going to add that here, and we're going to use that to demonstrate a bit what it's capable of, because most synths in Ableton's locker, they all have, you know, filters, and they have, for example, in drift here, you've got a filter. You don't have, it's a very analog-y type of synth drift. Love how it sounds, but you don't have lots of filter types. So actually this is doing a lot more over here, but we do have a filter. We have an envelope that we can use on the filter, which I've just deactivated down here. I set it to 0% because envelope 2 is tied to the filter by default, and we've got an LFO here, so we can modulate our filter frequency in the drift, and it sounds great. But what about auto filter? What does this come with, and you know, what is it all about? Well, it's very impressive. It's hard to pick a favorite feature for me about this update, because I love everything I've shown so far for the music creation, and now we've got something that can help us modulate stuff and transform sounds, right? So we're now starting to look at things processing where we can transform it. So if you look at the filter, it looks pretty much like the old auto filter, except for a few things. We've got a nice new sidechain tab, which is really cool, that we can open out, and it's very easy to use. And I think all of the sidechain devices in Ableton are all now looking like this, the compressor as well. So a little bit easier and good to clean and easy to understand what's going on when you choose a sidechain source. So we'll look at that in a moment. And then we've got, let's say, filter types and shapes. We've got a lot of the standard ones that we've always had. Low pass has always been around, of course. High pass has always been around. Band pass, notch, and morph. They're all in the auto filter since Ableton Live's been in business and being a DAW. But DJ is brand new, comb is new, resampling, notch and low pass, and vowel. And it's in this section here where we can get expression and a lot more interesting stuff. So if we were just doing the very basics that I might do over here in the drift, let's do that first with the auto filter. So let's have a high cut, or a low pass filter as it's known. What else do we see around here? Well, we see that we've got the typical filter shapes, stuff we're already familiar with: resonance, 12 dB curve, 24 dB curve, the different types. As I said, there's how many new ones? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Great. This is all familiar stuff. We've got drive over here, so we've got really nice. We can add some depth and crunch. We've got some different filter characters, which is nice. There's a couple of new ones in there that were not in the OG filter. We've also got clipping, which is really nice. So you can kind of drive the distortion. You can hear in a moment here, and we can clip that off so we get no, nasty clipping or high resonances. We can kind of keep that under control. And then in the middle here, we've got our LFO, which again existed on the old auto filter, but nothing like as clean and as easy to understand what it's doing. And we've also got new wave shapes. So when we open up the LFO, we don't just have, I think on the old one, sine, triangle, saw, square, and noise. Now we've got ramp up, ramp down, wanderer, and sample and hold. So we're getting more options there as well. And the envelope is also over here. And I think these kind of things were underused in the original filter because you don't really see what's happening. So if we take, so let's maybe just loop this up a bit shorter just while we work on it. And we're going to do in the filter here first up just a bit of vibe like we might do in the drift, but with the auto filter, right? So let's use a bit of envelope. What you get is this beautiful ghost layer. So you can see exactly what that envelope is doing. It's opening up the filter around the cutoff. And if we make our envelope the negative direction, it's going to close the filter down from that cutoff point. Really nice. So I love that we've got the ghost layer. You can see, like in wavetable would be the other example where you would see that happen. Again, on the drift, if we can set that same workflow up here, but you're not going to see it. You're going to have to hear it. You're going to have to understand what that's doing. Here we can kind of see it, which is quite a nice feature. I love that. Let's use the sidechain for a second. So let's say that we open up the sidechain of the filter. We turn on external, right? So we're going to bring a source into the brand new auto filter, and we're going to set that source as our drum track at the moment, which is the top one up here. And we can choose, there's no FX on it, but we could say pre-FX if we want, so that it's clean coming into here. And now what we can do is make the filter envelope react to the sidechain. So if I turn off the sidechain, it's still got an envelope, but it reacts different when we sidechain it. So in the future, if we get something nice and sustained, like a pad or something, we can really get the pump in here of the sidechain source, and we can route any sources into this filter, which is amazing. So think about that, often we use compressors, right, to duck the bass out the way of the kick. Well, you can make something duck out the way. Instead of using a compressor, you can use a filter, and that has a different sound to it than a compressor would. So we can use the filter to sidechain. And Bicep, my producers, some of the producers that I absolutely love their work, they do that a lot on things like chords and stuff. They use a filter sidechain on their chord progressions and instruments instead of a compressor to get that vibe that I'm speaking of. So we're going to turn that off. Envelope. So we've got our basic something we would have done probably already in the drift, but we can do it here and we can see exactly what it's doing, right? So let's turn off the envelope. Let's have a high cut. Now let's have an LFO wiggling the cutoff a bit. So let's bring up the rate, the amount, sorry. So instead of the envelope, now we're trying the LFO, right? How about a bit faster? A bit more resonance. Some drive. Let's clip it so that we can kind of get that little bit of driving into it, but under control. So those are things we could do before with the auto filter, but we probably maybe weren't, right? Perhaps we underused. Let's play around with the waveforms that we've got in here. On the LFO waveform, this is. Super nice, right? So we get some really nice movement on our cutoff. This will be really organic because the wanderer moves around in its own independent. Sample and hold. Let's sync it instead of using free rate. And you've got all these options. This is all the options we've got here on the LFO, right? So not only do we control the amount, that's a standard thing, but the rate of the LFO, we've now got all these beautiful features as well. We can do it in time. We're currently in frequency. We can do it synced, so note syncing. Those are fairly common. You're going to find those on the old auto filter, but now we've got triplet, dotted, 16th, and lots of good stuff there. So we can kind of, it goes deeper, right? So that's dotted 8, LFO filter opening and closing amount. So lots of good stuff there, but we're still just tip of the iceberg, right? So we're modulating our cutoff with all of these new wave shapes, or trying some of the new wave shapes. We're using the envelope. So we could use these in combination, by the way. So we've got a high cut, low pass filter. Always think about as well that you can modulate with more than one source. So we can come back to this. Let's take off the LFO amount for a moment. Let's have some envelope. So it's opening when the notes are playing. So these notes are triggering the filter opening, right? So that's the envelope. And now we could have an LFO wobbling the filter and the envelope, right? So if we go in here, let's just do a sine for a moment. So like I said, I might be showing that I love the auto filter update. It's absolutely amazing. Lots of visual help for you guys and girls and all of us producers, so that we can kind of see and hear, but we can also connect a bit better what's actually going on when we're doing all of that. So those were existing in Ableton's auto filter in the past, but perhaps not as obvious as what we're sort of seeing in action. Let's just reset this a little bit back to how it was. And now we're going to explore some of the other filter shapes here, because now the fun continues with this device. It's well worth just 2 hours just looking at this, to be honest. So getting into this range, I won't do too much of the DJ filter because that one really is all about, you know, live performance, I think, where we can sweep just simply low and highs away. Great, any live set, any live performers out there, you're going to have one of these somewhere and mapped, so you can do some really nice like DJ effects, you know, filtering things in and out. So that's pretty straightforward. But the fun starts when we start looking at the comb downwards. So these are all the new ones, right? Let's maybe do resampling first, because I think this is the most easiest one to understand what it's doing. And again, I'm just going to reset everything around the place to sort of the default. Okay. Let's open up the cutoff. Right, so if we're playing these drift chords, so it's kind of a bit like inside of Ableton's effect category, we have a device called Redux, right, where it kind of lo-fi's the bit rate of whatever we're feeding it, and it kind of lo-fi's and crunches it up and turns it into a lo-fi kind of sound. And that's what this filter kind of does. It adds grit, crunch, distortion. It sounds great. So if that's what you're looking for, again, you can modulate that and you can get in there and you can get this beautiful crunchy filter. And why not group this device, Command G on a Mac or Control G, and start layering up some auto filter. So maybe you have that layer and then you have another layer of other modulation and other sources. Like my brain just says, okay, what else can we do here? Lots. And you know, when you mess around like that in a sound design session, generally away from making a nice music track, perhaps a separate day, you might come up with new sounds that you don't have anywhere else in your computer or you haven't heard outside of it, and that might be a game changer for your music, right? So great filter, all about grit, distortion and crunch. So what else do we have in our locker here? We've got the comb filter. Now, comb filters are great because they kind of like, you know, have all these little notches. And when we hear sort of certain genres, maybe drum and bass and, you know, some nasty basses and certain sort of like, you know, morphing kind of sounds like a Reese bass and things like that, there's often a bit of comb filtering in there to get that kind of sort of morphing sound moving around and the sort of, again, grit and texture that's part of it. So and what you also get is this beautiful, rich, full sound, night and day. And again, I've just modulated it with a bit of envelope, and you've got the ghost layer in the background showing you what's going on. And comb filters can be great for getting a bit more kind of stereo in here as well. So if we go over to here, you'll notice as well, when you click in here, this section changes. So this is related to the envelope. This is now LFO. So if we go in here and we now play with the phaser bits, we get some stereo kind of width into it. And let's actually come over to the morph tab and we'll morph it around a bit as well. So hopefully you can hear that. It's a really nice way. So if we take off the envelope, you will hear that. We don't really hear as much stereo, right? But if we put the envelope in, now we get this kind of wideness, and what we're doing with the phase section is making them phase away from each other. So the chorus filter sounds beautiful. Comb filter, sorry, sounds awesome. There we go. You get all that stereo phasing. Yeah, so I digress. I feel myself going down a sound design rabbit hole, right? So the comb filter, messing around with envelopes and LFO, sounds amazing. Great way to get some stereo into whatever you're filtering, get some movement, get some really interesting vibes to it. That's the comb filter. Let's skip our way down to the next one, the notch and the low pass. I think this is going to be one that I will use an awful lot. I really like it. It's got the low pass, so we're sweeping away the highs, and we've got this big old notch here, which we can use the morph down here and move that notch around a bit wherever it's sitting on the audio that it's filtering. So again, we can move that notch around. We can move it here and then add some envelope or the LFO instead of the envelope perhaps. You could take just this filter on the drift and these chords, and you could take it somewhere brand new. So that's the notch filter. Finally, if there's French speakers in the house, the piece de resistance, well, I think that it's again pretty hard to decide which one of these are great, but they're all amazing. And don't forget, folks, this is all coming for all of us in Live 12.2 on the 11th of June. This is landing. Auto filter, game changer. It just went to a whole new level. Shaquille Oatmeal 2008. I'm not sure if you're a basketballer. Hi, I'm a 16-year-old trying to learn production. What do you think about GarageBand? GarageBand is a great place to start, my friend. If you've got a copy of that, get stuck in, start making music with it. You know, I learnt on things like GarageBand and Logic before I moved on to things like the DAW we're looking at here, Ableton Live. That one was the DAW that felt the most natural for me to use. But GarageBand's an awesome place to start. All right, so the final filter here, or new filter shape, is the vowel. And this one, you'll notice as well, typically with Ableton things, when we're changing these around to the different filter types, there's changes going on around us, right? So different sections correspond. So envelope is here, LFO is here, filter types and of the circuit, the drive up here. But when we change in here, so the notch filter, we've got resonance and morph, okay? And if we have the vowel filter, we get formants and morph. And we get a pitch here now. So we're not actually moving frequency anymore. We're pitching in semitones here up and down, because this should be a really musical vowel filter like the human voice, A, E, I, O, U. It should be able to do those A, E, I, O, U sort of sounds. And then if we go resampling, you'll see that it's obviously filter frequency. We don't have resonance and we don't have morphing. That's not part of that filter. So it's, you know, nice and intuitive, I think. Comb filter, morphing and resonance, typical kind of characteristics that we want on that filter. So great stuff, Ableton, on the design. So let's play with this one. Let's get some movement into it. When you play with the morph or the formants, you're moving around this. You can kind of do it up here. So you've got a little XY controller. You can move around, but you can also do that over here, right? So here's the formant and the morphing. Yeah, the auto filter, absolute fire. So, you know, I've seen a couple of people, again, do very specific videos where they sort of showed that valve filter being used for French house. You can do a lot of like Daft Punk kind of style filter effects with that, particularly using this filter. Right now, it's just being spread over my drift synth here, which is just a standard drift. Nothing really done other than a small tweak on the envelope. That's it. And we were using the auto filter to give it its character. So what I'm going to do is finally set this to kind of how I'm going to use it for the little piece of music we've got so far. And we're going to move on to raw next. And what is happening in raw in 12.2. So let's set this back up. All of these great things I did, there was some great sounds in that messing about, but in the end, I'm probably just going to use it right now just as a simple sort of low or high pass, a high cut, low pass filter with a bit of an envelope just to give it a nice sort of feeling that I would have done in the drift itself. Because that sort of fits the kind of music we've got going on here at the moment a bit. Could also do a band pass. Now let's move a band pass. Very nice. May have a bit of echo. Okay, so actually, I'm going to turn the echo off because now what we're going to do is bring raw into the mix. Okay, because raw is also getting a new update in 12.2. So we've worked our way along. We've got the brand new meld chord oscillator that's playing the first track over here. We've got the expressive chords in, that's making chords of a pattern I played in with drift. And we're now using the auto filter as the expression, the filter expression of the drift instead of the built-in drifts filter. And now we're going to take a look at raw and what's happening with that. And we're going to add an instance of raw on this expressive chords after that auto filter. Maybe after the reverb, we'll check that in a moment. And so what is raw? What's happened to raw in 12.2 that you're going to have access to? We've got new routing sections in here. And the two new ones are delay and feedback. And raw, again, just to digress for a second, I recently had an artist of mine asking, who's still working in 11, which is absolutely fine. I have live 11. And he asked me sort of what are the differences between 11 and 12, and I started writing down the changes. And I see online often people are talking about like, I'm not bothering upgrading and I'm not paying to upgrade to 12 because 11's absolutely fine. And I started to write down what came with 12, and I've been using it since the very beginning that it came out, and it really is a big jump up. And particularly in areas where, the challenge with this particular artist working in 11 is some of the sounds they want to create of some of their artists that inspire their music is really difficult to do with the FX and instruments that we had before. So think about Meld being a whole new synthesizer. Think about this raw effect essentially is a professional distortion saturation plugin that is an equivalent to you going and buying FabFilter Saturn. And so we've now got more tools and professional tools that mean we can change how things sound and make them sound different. And we don't have to go and buy those tools. They're built into the DAW. We've also got lots of music making tools, which is also great for people transitioning, beginners learning. There are lots of things for beginner friendly content in 12 because there are MIDI tools and ways to create MIDI without needing to be a professional musician or pro keyboard player. Everything we've done so far today has been one finger patterns that have been then turned into chords with Meld or chords with the expressive chords. So it's quite a big jump. And I was quite surprised even myself when I started to put the two side by side and say, okay, how do I make that sound in 11? Because I know how I'm going to do it in 12. And 11's more challenging because, I'd love to have third-party stuff to do that because it's not so easy. Synths are pretty much the same in 11. Workflow, FX and things like that are quite different. And also sound design possibilities are stronger in 12. Anyway, let's carry on with the music and look at raw. So what we've got are two new sections. We've got delay and feedback. Let's do them one at a time. So if we set up raw to be in delay, you will see that when we choose that down here, so default raw is a single stage distortion, saturation, very powerful device for processing your sounds. And then we've got all the beautiful things that came with before. We can change it to serial routing, parallel, multi-band's amazing, mid-side. They were all there before. But now we've got delay, and you'll see that we've got a direct section, like the dry section coming into raw, and then we've got a delayed tab. So that means that we can apply in the raw different distortion and saturation and processing to the direct signal as well as the delayed. And down here, which is great, this is definitely something you want to make a note of, there's a blend section here, and as you can see it's currently 50-50, but you can turn the bias all the way to one way or the other, so you can completely control a lot of fine-tuning of exactly what it's going to do to the sound. So let's mess around firstly with the delay of the raw on this Expressive Chords drift patch. I've turned off the filter for a moment. We'll come back to that in a second, but let's just make sure we can kind of hear what this is doing. So on the direct source, if we add something to the direct signal, we can add a bit of raw in here. We could change from the soft to a bit of noisy one. And if we put the blend knob over to 100, it would be only direct. And if we went over here, we'd be blending more to the delayed side of things. And you could also turn this off. Okay, so let's tone down the direct a little bit, or let's leave it at 0 for now. Blend at 50-50 and we'll go to the delayed side of things. Now delayed, it's not going to be delayed until we sort of start playing around with the feedback over here. So again, the feedback section of the raw has been there since day one. It's really, again, an amazing feature. We can feed it back in on itself and we can get a bunch of different options about the feedback. It could be time-based, note syncs, triplets, dotted, or even a musical pitch. So let's bring in a bit of an amount on that as we sort of mess around with the delayed side of the raw. Okay, so we can now kind of hear that delayed being tied to the feedback. So if I change the feedback from time to synced, so you can be on that feedback delayed side of things, applying your own saturation and distortion engines here to that delayed signal and process it completely different to what's going on in the direct signal. Really amazing, again, for sound design and possibilities here. So this is one whole new sort of workflow that's possible here. Let's explore it a little bit further and then we'll sort of move on, because there's a lot that we could be doing here with the delayed side. So we can make the direct just a little bit of soft saturation. So now we can hear a lot more the feedback side of things versus the direct. Really, really nice. Let's blend it a bit, move the blend around a bit. Right, just the delayed side. Probably would suggest putting a limiter behind this if you're going to drive it really hard on the feedback, just to be safe. Because we're going to get lots of almost endless feedback. Bring our blend back. Nice. There's all sorts of timbres there now, right? That we didn't have a moment ago. Just the delayed side. Let's put our filter back in. That's pretty nuts. So yeah, hopefully you get the idea. The delayed direct raw, very impressive. Also much like the auto filter. So I just went back to the filter just to play around with that a bit while messing around with the drift. So we've got a nice combination of things going on here. Let me also just try moving my reverb for a second. Yeah, I might have it, I actually quite like it affecting the tail, so I'll leave it where it was. Saw the limiter do a bit of work a moment ago, so that's why it's there, because as you can hear, starting to get a lot of feedback driving this quite hard, this section. So the delayed direct blend knob is important. The driving, it's all about the feedback and the selection of the feedback delay, whether it's time sync, triplet, dotted, or notes, that's going to affect this section of the raw. But thinking that you can process that with all the good things that raw allows you to do on that delayed signal only, on the direct signal only, or a mix of both. Amazing stuff, really. I'm just going to actually put that back how I had it. See if we can do that, and then I'm just going to switch that one off, and we're going to grab a brand new one, I think, just so I can go back to that in a moment, although I messed it up a fair bit, I think, when I was doing what I was doing just towards the end there. So let's grab another raw. Let's explore the other side of it, which is the feedback section of it. So that's just one part of what comes with the brand new 12.2 update. The other one is feedback. Okay, so now we've got the same thing. So once you get a handle on this, you'll get a handle on, we're looking for the blend. So there it is again. It allows us to blend between the two. And like I said, you can turn these tabs off, and you can also turn off the shapers. So you've got further control deeper in. What we might want to look at, the same as the auto filter has, we've got this lovely sidechain section that we're seeing on the new devices in 12.2. We've got sidechain here, but we've now got more. Again, this raw goes pretty deep, same as we've sort of seen along the way today. Ableton Live keeps giving us devices, features, workflows that can, you know, as a serious professional who might be doing this a long time, there's still things to push and go further in. And if you're beginning, there's more than enough here. So there's something for everybody. And in this sidechain section, we've got an external sidechain, same as the filter. So we could say, listen out for something in our track and use that as a sidechain source. And we've got this MIDI feedback note. So we need to explore that in a moment. So we've got this kind of pretty interesting section, and that's only going to appear when you choose the feedback routing, right? So when you've got actually a telefib, it is still there, but Yeah, maybe you can use it with the delay as well. Actually, I haven't played around with that, but perhaps it will disappear eventually, or it might stay there actually. And there you go. We could use it right across the board. Wasn't something I thought about, but I had a go with it with feedback, because it is tied to the FB note is the feedback over here. So let's see. I haven't tried it out with the other bands. But I did try it out with the feedback. That is this MIDI to feedback note. So direct and feedback. So let's have a mess around with that just as it is for a second. And we'll work from there. Let's make sure we've got a few things turned off. Okay, so we already know about the blend knob. We already know that for feedback, to essentially start feedback, we need some feedback over here, right? We need an amount here. So I'm still keeping my limiter there just in case, and it will limit if I drive it hard. So let's just do a quick MIDI track over here. Plug in a 4/4 beat, just a simple pattern for a kick, let's say. And then let's grab a kick drum for that. Let's do 505, Roland drum machine kick, if we can find one of those. That'll do it. It's a nice punchy kick. And hit play on that. And then what we're going to do over here is that's just going to give us a little bit of a sidechain source, right? An obvious sort of sidechain in a sense of a kick drum coming in. So if we go to the raw here, and as you can see, the feedback, you might be thinking, well, what is the difference? The delay, it sounds pretty similar. Well, yes, I'm using at the moment in the feedback mode, a dotted eighth note as the feedback section, but it is different. It doesn't sound the same. It's a whole new section. The other one we were playing around with direct and delay. We're now playing around with direct and feedback. And as I said, I think it really shines in a moment when we mess around with this area that I've played with previously. So let's just have a look. If we do external sidechain and we bring the 505 kick into here, and we pop over to the modulation area and look in the envelope, and there we can see our kick drum, right? Creating an envelope here. So that's because we've got the kick coming in as a sidechain source here, which is a common thing you might do. You might have your kick, so you could pump it. You've also got sidechain gain here, so if the kick was a bit quiet, you could bring it up. But we've got plenty there, and you can also tune in the mix a bit of the dry sounds, so what's going through here, the drift and everything, and the kick. But if I go to the matrix now, and I go to the envelope tab, let's say the filter frequency of the feedback section, I'm going to use the sidechain input. See how it's now moving? So let's use our blend. So the feedback of raw filter frequency is now being modulated by the kick drum. So it's got that pump. So if you come over here and we take that sidechain source away, you can see it's gone, right? So really great way, get more movement into the raw. And this could be anything. So we could feed it the whole drums. Instead of the 505 kick on its own, we could feed it all of the drums. So that would be a different envelope. because it's a whole drum kit, right? It's all of this. So I blended it back. Going to go back to my 505 kick. So the reason I took my echo off from this chain of effects and I switched it off is I'm now kind of doing all of that in the raw plus. Like, you know, I'm not just putting a delay or an echo behind what we've got. I'm kind of controlling it with another workflow, which is giving me some really interesting options. I can kind of saturate the feedback side of the raw with its own saturation compared to the direct source. And I can do it with the other mode you just saw a moment ago, the delay and the direct source. And they're nice ways, again, to get movement and changing sounds and timbres and character and frequency. So the external sidechain, I think on both the filter and on the raw, taking something like a kick or the drum kit into here should give you a pretty straightforward concept of how that works. Same as we sidechain things in a compressor, perhaps it's the same concept here. But if we look at the bottom one down here where we've got this MIDI feedback note, well, what's that all about? It says that we can feed it MIDI from somewhere. So let's make a little bit of a, this is going to get a bit more, if it hasn't already, further sort of sound design, but hopefully you do find it interesting and inspiring. And if you are a beginner here, you know, take out of this what you need to take out of it and think about some of these things as an inspiration for perhaps the future, because you don't have to begin with some of the things I might show here in today's video. But it's also a deeper exploration of 12.2. Hopefully you're get excited about what's coming and how you can make all these amazing sounds with what we're looking at. So we're going to make a brand new MIDI track, and on that MIDI track we're going to make a new MIDI clip, and on that MIDI clip we're just going to get some notes in here, and we can do that in Ableton 12 by coming to the generate tab over here, and we're just going to open up seed, and then I'm literally just going to hit generate. It's going to give me a bunch of notes there, and I'm going to then just sort of bring it down a little bit. The voices, there's not so many, maybe something like that, maybe a little bit more on the density, something like that. And so now I'm going to go back over to the Expressive Chord device, and we're going to use this as some MIDI triggers. They're just going to send that MIDI information over into here. So we need to say, let's call this the MIDI bus. So it's just, or you could also, maybe even better language, MIDI trig, right? So a trigger. And we're going to get back over here, and we're going to say, in here, we're going to choose the MIDI trigger. So now that's MIDI should be coming into here. Post mixer, again, doesn't really matter. There's no effects or instrument there. We could say pre-effects if we like. So we're going to hit play on that. And we know it's coming in there. That's great. So that's pretty cool. We don't need to see all this stuff anymore for a moment. But what we now need to sort of pay attention a little bit to is the MIDI trigger, MIDI to F feedback note. So when you go over to the feedback area, you probably notice it's sort of grayed out a bit, like, but the note section here is what we want, right? So we're looking for feedback note, which is what that is, right? So we're kind of matching that up over here. Let's keep the amount down for a second, and then we'll bring that up. So what we're doing is we're sending those MIDI triggers to the feedback section of raw in the note section. So let's see what that does, or listen to what that does. And essentially, I just made a pattern here that we could continue to make patterns here, right? So if we don't really like that pattern, we could bring it down and we can keep using seeds and generating new patterns, right? So we kind of like start a whole new clip here. Let me just undo what just happened. I'm going to copy down the one I like. So that could be one, the first one we made, right? And now we can just come in here and we can go again, right? And now we send that over to here. It's got to be playing as it's not getting any triggers. Now it gets to triggers. And all of these notes, they could be more planned out. We can move them down an octave. Got this musical feedback in the raw. Pretty wild. So if I turn off raw, now you might say, why destroy those beautiful chords? Well, we might not. We might just record. So we might take this kind of quite far, and then we might record what the results are and then layer that with our beautiful chords, right? So we might use those to generate this kind of like weird sequence that's coming out of this, feeding the MIDI triggers into the feedback side of things. Very interesting, and something that you can really play around with, as I said. And the MIDI triggers that you're using to do this can really be anything. So we can again even flip the pattern to be other triggers, right? So I just made triggers, but you know, they could be different patterns. So let's say we try a chord in here. Let's do that. Let's build a chord of some sort. So just a triad. Actually, why not? Let's do it with stacks. Might as well keep going with some of Ableton 12's tools here. So let's do stacks. And then just modify those a wee bit here and there to give ourselves a little bit of variation. Okay, something like that. So instead, we're feeding it chord triggers now, rather than the two patterns that I made with seed. So now we come back over to here, and it's coming in here, and we see what we've got now. Gone back to the triggers that I think work the best at the moment. So from a sound design point of view, the two new sections of raw, given all of this sidechain input area of MIDI note imports, external sidechains, but also the beautiful feedback and the delay sections, lots and lots of sounds, timbres, possibilities in there to get your sound designing hats on and turn and transform your music into something new places. I'm really looking forward to digging into those a little bit further. The main thing I've shown you is how they work, and then after that you need to spend a bit of time, of course, to find the right applications and get them to sound the way you want it to sound. But so far, let's see what we're keeping here that's working good. So let's take one more look before we wrap up today. We've been on this sound a lot, but we've now explored raw. What's new about it in 12.2? The filter, amazing stuff. There's one more device that I think that's interesting to take a look at as well before we wrap up today's stream, and that is the spectral resonator, which again is another great device. And this one also has received some extra features to it, so we can make it scale aware. That's really great. So we can get it into our key and scale, so whatever musical pitches or things we ask it to tune to or frequencies, it's going to stay in that tuning, which is great. And again, we can feed it various triggers, but the main thing would be the scale awareness, quantization as well, so we can kind of chromatically quantize the musical results that we create when we start resonating things. And I just think this is, again, a great device for sort of coming up with, new textures and sounds. If we were working on a track here, could do a lot of sound design with all things that we've looked at today, or a combination of them. And similar to what we just looked at a bit with the raw, we could also say MIDI, and we could actually go back to those chords that I made with stacks a moment ago over here on this MIDI trigger track. So where have they gone? Should be there somewhere. There they are, down there. Okay, so that is a little chord progression there. And what we can do with the spectral analyzer, spectral resonator, I often get that wording round back to front there. Turn on the MIDI inputs, receive those triggers from the MIDI trigger, which is there. And what we can do is say polyphonic here versus monophonic. So if we leave it at mono for a second, we don't really get the benefit of these chords. If we change to poly, we should. And that can sound really nice as a little layer, and you could blend it how could be a lot of the resonator that you're looking for, or it could be blended down to a certain point. If we take it out of scale awareness, so that's nice on its own layer, right? So that's the kind of thing, you know, if you were to basically, you know, render that down into a track. So let's take a quick look at that. If we go over to the arrangement view for a second, let's take our MIDI with us from this track, bring it over. So what are we on, the expressive chord track? Yeah. Let's pop into here. Stretch that out a little bit. Let's loop that up. Okay, let's make sure we've got the same sound. Let me make sure we put it in the right place. So I did not, absolutely did not there, which is fair enough. I needed to scroll further. Okay, let's get up here. All right, now, quiet. So let's just check what we've got missing and what we have. So we need to check our pathway for a second. Okay, so on here, this is all going as it should. So yeah, why that's not going to work over in here is we're going to need to just a little bit of figuring out here. This will all make sense in a moment. Just give me a second to get the workflow. So if we get this over, we should now probably get a recreation. We do. So what I was thinking is that you could take this patch here, and what I've kind of done with the resonator here, and we could turn this into its own clip and then switch it off and then use it alongside what we have. So what we can also see by just bringing this over into here and taking a look is Ableton's brand new bounce in place, right? So what we can do here is kind of like grab a section of the Expressive Chords track here, and we could right click and bring up the menu, and we can see we can freeze like we always could. We could bounce the track in place, or we could bounce to a whole new track, right? So what we kind of want is bounce to a new track, and there it is in audio. And what I love about this is if you're working over here, you can see that you can now turn that MIDI back on and you could make another change. So let's say we just go in here, we open up the decay just as an example, and then we flip that again, right? And so it's going to give us a second choice of that. And you could just you could do endless resampling here as a sound design kind of tool. So this bounce in place, bounce to a new track, super fast way to come up with sort of some variations. You've still got the MIDI, you've still got everything you originally had. It just deactivates it when you've got the audio below it. So if we turn one of these off, yeah, and you can hear that was the different one that I did the first time round. So I'm going to give that a new color. So I make sure I drag it to the right track now. And then I take that bounce, let me do it. Like over to here, drop it into there. And then what we're going to do is turn that off of here. And now we've got Expressive Chords back how we had it. What we've got so far, now we can bring a new little audio clip in. Make sure we loop it. And now we can have the best of both worlds, and we could do, yeah, the sky's the limit here. You know, maybe what we'll do with the audio versions that we created is flip them around, make them reversed, add some different processing on them, but they become their own layer. To go with what we had, right? So there's some great possibilities in, yeah, all of these new devices. So let's kind of get back to a little recap of what we sort of looked at today, what's coming in 12.2, but hopefully you could see there are, you know, a lot of options here as well where you can go very deep with all of this. So recapping a little bit what we've got going on over here. Simple drum grooves, that's not really part of what we've done today. Main thing we've explored at the very start is Meld. Comes with a brand new oscillator, a chord oscillator, great for playing with one finger. We don't play chords, we play rhythms and patterns on our keyboards, or draw your notes in, however you want to do it. And then we use that oscillator's two macros, shape and inversion, to come up with all sorts of nice versions of that chord oscillator, different shapes and different inversions of that shape. And I showed some interesting workflows, some fun little tricks that you can try out, where you can play around with the results of those, which is what's sort of going on over here. I basically mapped the two macros to the rack. I put it Meld in a rack, mapped it to these two macros to macro 1 and 2 inside the rack, and then we created some snapshots down here which are different variations of those macros. Nice workflow. Oscillator sounds great. First way we can make chords now, Meld. And Meld also has a brand new FX LFO shape down here called the Scrambler, which is pretty fire as well. And then we looked at Expressive Chords, done a deep dive on this device. Just has its own video on my channel. Great device. Again, playing one finger, black, white keys, getting different chords, listening with your ears and deciding that sounds great, that doesn't sound great. There's lots of chord sets we can add to it. So lots of fun. And then we've just been exploring since then all of the updates to the device, the effects and processing, the auto filter, amazing stuff. And then the raw feedback and delay tabs that are now new in here. And then the spectral resonator, just showing how it can be scale aware, and that there's some pretty cool input side of things on that, but it's, I think, mainly scale awareness and quantization that's new to it. But it sounds amazing, and you can use that for lots of applications. So in the end, we've got a musical idea. That would be the nice basis of a cool kind of like dubby track that could be taken on from where we've got to so far. And it's mainly been about Meld and Expressive Chords to get that nice sound that we have. And the patterns, the MIDI themselves, they're just, as I said, single playing little riffs. So on that note, I'm going to wind things up for today. I hope you have found it interesting. I hope that does get you excited about 12.2. I think it's really great. It's free for all users, comes out on June the 11th. Hopefully this has given you a window, gets you thinking, gets you motivated. Download it when it comes out and get stuck into all these good things. I'm looking forward to hearing what you come up with. And as always, well, what do we say? Don't forget to push all the buttons, you know, or ding the bell to receive the notifications, because I'm actually curious as to how many of you may know or may not know if I'm going to do a live stream. I do put posts in the YouTube community section if that's going to happen. So I'll be back at the end of the month with another live, but obviously the easiest way is to ding the bell so you know when I've scheduled a stream, when I'm going to be on live next. So keep on creating, everybody. Have a fantastic rest of your weekend, and I'll see you all very soon, the last Sunday of the month. Take care, everybody, and ciao for now. Goodbye. See you later.